Hey guys, a very warm welcome back to the channel for this latest episode of Sandship with myself, Video Edge. Today we're going to be bringing you something a little bit different to our usual approach of our designs in the micro factories. We're going to be using a basic factory here. We're calling this one the everything building because it produces as many materials as we can fit in within this level 7 16 by 16 factory. With that being said, let's dive straight into our sandbox building and show you exactly how this is built. This is going to produce a total 27 items from all the materials within Sandship. The first element we're going to start off here is glass production. I'm going to place our first synthesizer in this top corner here, changing this to silicon, and we are going to be using as much fast tech as we can just to increase the outputs here on all the materials. But with that being said, you can just use regular grabbers and regular tech, but obviously the outputs will be reduced. So we've got our raw silicon exporting into that first exporter there, and next up is a case of crafting all the remaining glass items. So we've split this off into 4 different lines, and this first line here we're going to split off again to produce the glass plates here from this press and the raw glass itself. Onto the second line here, we're going to put a blower building down, create glass tubes, and we're going to carry on in a similar vein for the third and fourth lines. We're going to be creating glass spheres for this third line and glass bottles for this fourth and final line. We can have a quick check of this now, and we can see we've got those first 6 items all coming in very nicely. Now we are limited to 5 synthesizers here, so we're going to be making the most of that, trying to produce as many materials as possible. With that first element completed, we're now going to move on to the copper production. Again, it's going to follow a similar format here. We're going to split this off into 4 lines again. Firstly, exporting the raw copper. The second line is going to consist of copper plates. Now for this third and fourth line, we're going to be producing copper rods and copper wires. So we're just going to start on this fourth line first, and that's going to be the copper rod production. So in order to complete that, we need to place down a cutter and finally an exporter. For this third line, we're going to produce the copper wires, and to do that, we're going to bring this round like so, place our cutter down, place the heater, followed by the extruder. I'm just going to wrap this belt round like so, and that is going to allow us to, in a later part of the design, also craft some circuit boards. So we're just going to set up the first part of the circuit board production here like so. And we're going to give this another whirl, and we can see we've added all those copper items into our output here. Now obviously with so many items being produced within this factory, there will be some lower outputs for these, but if you're the kind of player that likes to play intermittently, and with the new transit system in place, you'll be able to come online to full transit capacities of all your items for a large quantity of your items, and you can just collect these and use them as and when you need. So we've got our copper and our glass production down. The next part of the design, we're going to move on to the iron production. And to do that, we're just going to place a third synthesizer here. We're going to use a fast grabber into this crusher building to make iron powder before exporting. And we're also going to use another grabber on the left hand side of it to put into a mechanical assembler and create some ammunition there, again into another exporter. Now for the remaining iron items, we're not going to need as many splitters here. We're going to split this once and then once more thereafter before exporting the raw iron ore there on our first line. For our second line, we're going to be producing iron plates. So we're going to put heater down, followed by a press and an exporter. For this third line here, we're going to place down a heater as normal. Again, another press, wrap this round, and we're going to be producing iron rods, iron bolts and iron wires from this splitter. So in order to do so, we're going to need 2 cutters here. We're going to split this cutter off once more, collect our iron rods, and in order to produce both the iron bolts and iron wires, we need to put 2 heaters down, an extruder for the iron wires and a shaper for the iron bolts. Again, exporting all those off, giving it another quick test. And we can see now those iron items are also in our outputs with some, I have to say, some decent outputs, guys. Okay, so we are promptly moving on. Next up is our steel production. So in order to do so, We're going to firstly place this synthesizer here. This is going to be our carbon synthesizer, and to produce the other carbon items we're going to do a similar approach here. We're going to grab the raw carbon on the left hand side, and for the top part of the synthesizer we're going to place a fast grabber and crusher down to create the carbon powder before exporting again. And for this right hand side we are going to place down an additional grabber here to help increase the supply of our steel production. So in order to produce the steel we're going to need to split this off, heat up and place some mixers down for which the steel can be produced in. We're also going to place a third mixer down just right of the first two to add an extra line of steel production. And then we're going to firstly output some steel plates on this left hand side before splitting off and producing both steel barrels and steel gears from these first two shapers. We also need to implement the iron part of the steel production, so we're going to place a synthesizer down here before splitting off and heating up into the mixers we've already placed down. So we've got our first mixer set up on the left. In order to get the second mixer, we're going to use an underground belt to go underneath the splitters and come out next to the synthesizer before putting another press down, splitting off, and here we're going to be producing our steel chains, steel rods and steel wires. So this first element is going to be the steel chains. So we've put a cutter down, we've put our heater down. Next up we need to put them into the mechanical assembler before exporting. And for this second line of the splitter we're going to use another cutter. In order to get the steel rods we're going to export the first line from this, and to get the steel wires we're going to place another heater down followed by an extruder and an exporter. So that's 3 more steel products added to this line here. For the third and final mixer we're going to bring out this raw steel. We're going to split this off twice. On the very right hand side we're going to collect our raw steel. Adjacent to that we're going to produce the steel plates to be exported. And for our third row we are going to press these down, and these are going to be our steel pipes. So the similar setup with the mechanical assembler and the exporter. So we've got all our steel items now being produced. Earlier we mentioned about adding in the circuit board production here. So in order to do that and finish off this design we're going to place a couple of fast grabbers coming out of this synthesizer here, followed by some heaters, and these lines are just going to add to the iron plate production. I'm going to export them at the bottom here and add another grabber so the cooled iron plates can be inputted into the electronics assembler before creating those circuit boards. And with that we'll be able to see that the circuit boards have been added to our production output list, and that finalizes the design, guys. We can see we've got a hefty amount of output here. All the basic materials are being produced here. We are limited by the synthesizers, so we can't produce any sulfur items, and the more complex items such as the gearboxes due to the amount of space they take up. So for those other items that we couldn't craft in this design, we figured there's plenty of space on your Sandship deck to implement factories that create those materials specifically. So if we have a quick check on the blueprint on this one, we can see the production is 25, and that's just down to the underground belts, not taking into consideration the additional materials there. So don't pay attention too much to that. Once it's operational, it will produce all the items we've listed. And we can see the required materials, again, not too expensive, guys. The main issue really is the gearbox, and that's only from the fast tech we've introduced. So again, if you're using regular grabbers, that won't be there. So we're going to chuck this into our basic factory now and see how it goes. So here we are, guys, we've put it into our basic factory here. We're just reconnecting the underground belts to make sure there's no issues with those. We're going to give it a whirl. And we can see all of these materials in our transit capacity here. And remember, guys, this is one factory producing all these outputs. It doesn't use that much substance, it doesn't cost a great amount, so if space is a premium on your Sandship deck at the moment, this might be a really good space-saving factory that you can utilize to produce all these materials. We hope you like this one, guys. We're particularly proud of this one, and it's something we will be putting on our Sandship. We like the idea of having all these materials ready to collect once we come back on the game. If you do have any questions, please leave them in the comments below, as usual. But until next time, thanks for watching, and bye-bye.